The mysterious encounter. The night was unusually quiet on John's small farm. The wind had stopped, and the only sound was the occasional chirping of crickets. John, a middle-aged farmer with a kind heart, was sitting on his porch, sipping a warm cup of tea. Life on the farm was simple, and John liked it that way. But tonight, something felt different. Suddenly, a bright light shot across the sky. It wasn't like a shooting star. This light was bigger, brighter, and faster. It zoomed across the horizon and disappeared behind the hills near John's field. Moments later, a loud crashing sound shook the ground. Birds flew out of the trees, startled. John stood up, his heart racing. What in the world was that? He muttered to himself. Grabbing his flashlight, John headed toward the field. He wasn't the type to get scared easily, but there was something about this that made him nervous. As he approached the source of the crash, he noticed a faint glow coming from the middle of the field. His steps quickened, and soon he saw it, a strange metallic pod, half buried in the soil. The pod was unlike anything John had ever seen. It was round, smooth, and covered in symbols that glowed faintly in the dark. Steam hissed from its sides, and the air smelled strange, like burnt metal and ozone. John's first thought was to call someone, maybe the authorities, but curiosity stopped him. He stepped closer, his flashlight beam trembling slightly. Suddenly, the pod let out a soft hiss, and a small door began to open. John froze. His heart pounded in his chest as he gripped the flashlight tightly. Out of the pod stepped two small figures. They were no taller than toddlers, with slim, delicate bodies. Their skin was a soft shade of blue, and their large, glowing eyes looked both frightened and curious. They wore simple, shiny outfits that seemed to shimmer in the moonlight. John stared in disbelief. These weren't humans. They were aliens. The two little beings looked up at John, trembling slightly. They didn't speak, but their eyes seemed to plead for help. One of them, the smaller one, stumbled and almost fell, but the other caught them. It was then John noticed how fragile they looked, as if they had been through something terrible. Are you kids okay?" John asked, his voice shaky. Of course, they didn't answer. They simply stared at him, their glowing eyes wide with fear. Then, to John's surprise, the smaller one stepped forward and reached out with a tiny hand. It was as if they were trying to trust him. John crouched down slowly, trying not to scare them. "It's okay," he said softly. "I won't hurt you." The little one placed their hand on John's arm. A warm sensation spread through him, and suddenly, images flashed in his mind. He saw a huge palace made of crystal, then a fiery explosion, and finally, the pod crashing onto Earth. John gasped and pulled back, realizing the images had come from the alien's touch. "Good Lord," he whispered. "You're running from something, aren't you?" The aliens didn't respond, but their sad expressions confirmed his guess. John looked around, realizing they couldn't stay here. The glowing pod would attract attention, and he didn't know who, or what, might be coming for these kids. "All right," John said, standing up. "You're coming with me. Let's get you inside before someone sees." He motioned for the aliens to follow him. At first, they hesitated, but then they walked after him, staying close like scared children. John led them back to his farmhouse, his mind racing with questions. Who were they? Where had they come from? And what had they been running from? Once inside, John grabbed a couple of blankets and wrapped the twins in them. They seemed to relax a little in the warmth. He noticed how their glowing markings dimmed slightly, as if they were calming down. "Let's see," John said, scratching his head. "I can't keep calling you aliens, can I? You need names." He looked at the smaller one first. "You," he said with a smile, "look like a Zara. And you," he added, pointing to the taller one, "can be Zane." The twins didn't react to their new names, but John felt better calling them something. As the night went on, John tried to figure out what to do next. He couldn't just call the government. He had a feeling they'd take the twins away and lock them up. He also couldn't let anyone in the town find out. People would panic. But as he sat there, thinking, something outside caught his attention. A strange, faint hum filled the air. John walked to the window and peered outside. In the distance, he saw lights moving across the sky. Several of them, like small searchlights. "They're looking for you," John whispered. He turned back to the twins, who were huddled together on the couch. "We need to be careful. Whoever's out there, they're not going to stop until they find you." John's protective instincts kicked in. These twins, whoever they were, needed him. And John wasn't about to let anything happen to them. But deep down, he knew this was only the beginning. Whatever had brought them here was far from over. Secrets in the sky. The next morning, the farm felt unusually tense. The alien twins, Zara and Zane, stayed close to John, watching him with their glowing eyes. Though they didn't speak, they seemed to understand everything he said. John's mind was a storm of thoughts. The lights in the sky last night weren't airplanes or shooting stars. They were something far more advanced. And now they were likely searching for the twins. John busied himself around the house, trying to act normal, but every now and then he'd glance at the twins. They were sitting quietly at the kitchen table, huddled together like scared children. Zara traced her tiny fingers over the wooden surface, leaving a faint glowing trail that vanished seconds later. Zane, the quieter one, kept looking out the window, as if expecting danger to arrive at any moment. "Can you understand me?" John finally asked, breaking the silence. Zara turned to him and tilted her head. Slowly, she raised her hand and touched her forehead, as if signaling she could hear his thoughts. John wasn't sure if he understood, but he decided to test it. He held up a cup of water and pointed to it. "Water," he said clearly. Zane blinked, and a faint image of water appeared in the air above his palm, shimmering like a hologram. John gasped, nearly dropping the cup. The twins weren't just listening. They could create images with their minds. "Well, that's something," John muttered, trying to stay calm. "You two aren't ordinary, are you?" The twins looked at each other, then at John. Zara stood up and gently touched his arm. Once again, images flooded his mind. This time, the vision was longer. He saw a grand palace, its towers stretching into the sky, made of shimmering glass-like crystals. Inside, two tall figures who resembled the twins stood in regal clothing, looking down at the two children with warmth and love. But the vision darkened. John saw explosions, fires tearing through the palace, and shadowy figures dragging the taller beings away. The vision ended with Zara and Zane being placed in the pod and sent away. John stumbled back, clutching the edge of the table. "Your royalty," he whispered. "Your family. They sent you here to keep you safe." The twins nodded slowly, their glowing eyes filled with sorrow. Before John could say more, a strange humming sound filled the air. It was faint at first, but grew louder, like a swarm of bees. John rushed to the window, and his heart sank. Hovering above the fields was a sleek, black drone, unlike anything he'd ever seen. Its circular body was smooth, with sharp edges that glinted in the sunlight. Red lights blinked in rhythm as it scanned the area. "They found us," John muttered. The twins ran to him, clinging to his arms. Their markings began to glow brighter, and Zara's hands trembled as she pointed toward the ceiling. "Shh," John whispered. "Stay quiet." The drone hovered closer, its red light sweeping across the farmhouse. John could hear a faint, robotic voice coming from it, speaking a language he didn't understand. He reached for the shotgun he kept near the door, knowing it was likely useless but feeling better with something in his hands. Suddenly, Zara stepped forward, her hands raised. Before John could stop her, she closed her eyes, and a shimmering sphere of light appeared around the house. The drone's red light flickered and dimmed as it scanned the shield, unable to penetrate it. "What are you doing?" John whispered, staring at Zara in awe. The drone let out a loud, angry whir, and began firing small, concentrated beams of light at the shield. The beams sizzled and sparked, but the shield held strong. Zara, however, looked pale and weak, as if the effort was draining her. Zane rushed to her side, placing his hand on her shoulder. The shield grew brighter for a moment, but John could tell they couldn't hold it for long. "We can't stay here," John said, making a snap decision. "Come on, let's go." He grabbed a bag, quickly stuffing it with supplies, water, food, and a flashlight. He motioned for the twins to follow him as he opened the back door. The shield flickered as Zara lowered her hands, and the drone instantly locked onto their movement. A shrill alarm blared from the machine as it began chasing them. John and the twins ran toward the woods behind the farmhouse. The dense trees provided some cover, but the drone's red lights pierced through the branches, searching for them. John's heart pounded as he led the twins deeper into the forest, his boots crunching against the fallen leaves. Finally, they reached a small cave hidden behind a cluster of bushes. John motioned for the twins to crawl inside. He squeezed in after them, holding his breath as the drone hovered just outside. Its red lights scanned the area, but it didn't detect them. After a tense few minutes, the humming sound faded, and the drone disappeared. John let out a deep sigh, wiping the sweat from his forehead. "That was close," he said. "Too close." The twins looked at him with gratitude, their glowing eyes softening. But John knew this wasn't over. Whoever had sent that drone wasn't going to give up easily. And now he was certain of one thing. Zara and Zane weren't just royalty. They were being hunted by something far more dangerous. As the three of them sat in the dark cave, a faint blue light began to glow around the twins. Zara raised her hand, and another hologram appeared in the air. This time, it showed a map of stars, with one planet highlighted in gold. John stared at it, his mind racing. "Is that where you're from?" The twins nodded, and John realized their journey had only just begun. A desperate escape. The quiet of the cave was broken by the distant whirring sound of approaching drones. John leaned against the rocky wall, clutching his shotgun, though he knew it was a poor match against the advanced technology hunting them. Zara and Zane huddled together, their glowing eyes darting toward the entrance, trembling in the dim light. "We can't stay here," John whispered, his voice firm but calm. "They're getting closer." Zane raised his hand, and a faint hologram appeared, a visual of the forest beyond the cave, showing the paths the drones were scanning. It was like a live feed. John watched as the drones crisscrossed the terrain, their red lights sweeping the undergrowth. His pulse quickened. "How are you doing that?" he asked in awe. Zane didn't answer. He just pointed to a narrow route between the trees. It was unpatrolled, but only for now. "Okay," John muttered, adjusting the bag of supplies on his shoulder. "You lead the way, little buddy." Zane nodded, his expression serious despite his small frame. Zara reached for John's hand, her touch radiating a strange warmth that steadied his nerves. Together, they crept out of the cave, staying low and quiet. The forest was alive with tension, the hum of drones, the rustling of leaves, and John's own rapid heartbeat. Every sound felt magnified, every movement a potential giveaway. They made it past the first clearing when a sudden roar filled the air. John turned sharply to see a massive black ship descending through the clouds. Its surface gleamed like polished obsidian, and its engines pulsed with an eerie rhythmic glow. The ship unleashed a swarm of smaller drones that spread out like a dark cloud. "They brought reinforcements," John muttered, gripping his shotgun tighter. "Fantastic." Zane stopped abruptly and turned to Zara. They exchanged a silent look, their markings glowing brighter. Zara raised her hands, and a shimmering shield enveloped them once more, but it was weaker this time. Flickering at the edges, she stumbled slightly, and John caught her before she fell. "She's too weak," he said, glancing at Zane. "We can't keep using that shield. It's wearing her out." Zane frowned, his tiny fists clenched, and then pointed to a distant hill. John squinted and saw what looked like a small cabin nestled at the edge of the forest. It wasn't part of his land, but he'd heard rumors about an old hermit who lived there. A genius with machines, but a recluse who didn't trust anyone. "You think someone's there who can help us?" John asked. Zane nodded firmly. With no better option, they made a dash for the cabin. The drone's search patterns shifted, and one of them caught a glimpse of their movement. A sharp metallic screech erupted as the drone fired a thin red beam, narrowly missing them and scorching the ground. "Keep running," John shouted, lifting Zara into his arms as Zane sprinted ahead. They weaved through the trees, John's boots slipping on loose dirt, the hum of pursuing drones growing louder with every step. When they reached the cabin, Zane immediately placed his glowing hand against the door. The markings on his skin pulsed, and the door unlocked with a soft click. John pushed it open, rushing inside, and slamming it shut behind them. The cabin was unlike anything John had expected. It was crammed with alien-looking devices, glowing screens, floating orbs, and strange tools that buzzed softly when touched. In the center of the room sat a man in a tattered gray coat, his hair wild, and his eyes sharp. He was surrounded by blueprints and half-built contraptions. "Who the hell are you?" The man barked, jumping to his feet and grabbing what looked like a modified laser rifle. "Not enemies," John panted, still holding Zara. "We need help. They're after these two." He motioned to the twins. The man's eyes narrowed as he studied the glowing markings on Zara and Zane. He lowered his weapon slightly. "Where did you find them?" "Does it matter?" John shot back. "They're in trouble, and those drones are right behind us." As if on cue, a loud thud shook the cabin. The drones had arrived, their red lights slicing through the windows. The man cursed under his breath and flipped a switch on the wall. A metallic hum filled the room as a large shield materialized around the cabin. "That'll hold them off for a bit," the man muttered. He turned to the twins. "These two, they're not ordinary, are they? Royal bloodlines, if I'm not mistaken. You're harboring some serious heat, farmer." "Yeah, I figured that out," John replied, his voice dripping with sarcasm. "Can you help us or not?" The man hesitated, then nodded. "If they're who I think they are, then I'm in. But we need to move fast. They won't stop until they've got them, or worse." The man introduced himself as Elias, a former engineer who had worked on secret intergalactic projects. He explained that the twins' markings were part of an ancient royal code, used to unlock powerful artifacts. "Artifacts?" John asked, confused. Elias smirked and pulled back a tarp, revealing a large, sleek device hidden beneath it. "Like this one. Found it years ago, buried near your farm. Never knew what it was for, until now." The twins' markings began to glow brighter as they approached the artifact. Zane placed his hand on its surface, and the device whirred to life. Holographic projections of star maps filled the room, showing planets, constellations, and what looked like a safe route through space. Elias stared in amazement. "This is it," he whispered. "The map to their homeworld. And if we can reach it, we might just find the answers you're looking for." John looked at the twins, who now seemed both hopeful and determined. "Then let's do it," he said. But before they could move, a deafening crash shook the cabin. The drones had broken through the shield. Elias grabbed his rifle and grinned. "Looks like it's time to fight." The galactic chase. The cabin shuddered under the relentless assault of the drones. Sparks flew as Elias' shields began to fail. The twins, Zara and Zane, clung to John, their glowing markings pulsing faintly as if reacting to the danger. Elias barked orders while frantically working on the artifact, its holographic star maps flickering across the room. "We don't have time to sit here," John shouted over the noise. "What's the plan, genius?" Elias smirked, his eyes gleaming with excitement. "Plan? I've got something better than a plan. Follow me." He pushed open a hidden panel in the floor, revealing a staircase leading to an underground bunker. Without waiting for a response, he grabbed the artifact and sprinted down, motioning for them to follow. John carried Zara, and Zane stayed close behind, his eyes darting nervously toward the now-breached cabin. The bunker was a chaotic blend of advanced alien tech and human ingenuity. At its center sat a battered but intact spaceship, its sleek design unlike anything John had ever seen. Its hull shimmered faintly, as though alive, and strange glyphs glowed softly along its sides. "You had a spaceship down here the whole time?" John asked, his jaw dropping. Elias grinned. "I'm full of surprises. It's not just any spaceship, it's one of theirs." He pointed to the twins, "Found it years ago, but it wouldn't activate until now. With the artifact, we should be able to jump-start it and get off this rock." Before John could respond, a deafening explosion above ground sent debris raining into the bunker. The drones had breached the cabin and were now drilling through the ceiling. Less talking, more flying. Elias yelled, slapping the artifact onto a console inside the ship. The glyphs on the ship's hull began to glow brighter, and a low hum filled the air as the engines roared to life. Zane stepped forward, his markings lighting up in sync with the ship's controls. He placed his small hand on the console, and the ship's systems responded instantly. A voice, soft and melodic, filled the bunker. "Royal clearance confirmed. Initiating launch sequence." John's eyes widened. "You're telling me the kid's flying this thing?" Elias shrugged. "Looks like royalty has its perks. Now strap in." The ship's engines roared, and the bunker shook violently. Zara and Zane worked together, their hands glowing as they synchronized with the ship's systems. The twins' connection with the ship seemed almost instinctive, as if it were an extension of themselves. "Hold on," Elias shouted as the ship shot upward, bursting through the rubble of the cabin and into the open sky. The sudden acceleration pinned John against his seat, his knuckles white as he gripped the armrests. Above them, the night sky was lit with chaos. The obsidian warship hovered ominously, its underside bristling with weapons. Swarms of drones buzzed like angry hornets, their red lights scanning for the fleeing ship. "We're not out of this yet," Elias called out. "Evasive maneuvers." Zane tilted his head, and the ship responded instantly, veering sharply to the left. Beams of red energy streaked past them, narrowly missing the hull. Zara's markings glowed brighter as she projected a holographic map onto the main console. "What's that?" John asked, squinting at the map. "A jump point," Elias explained. "She's plotting an escape route through a wormhole." Smart kid. The warship, however, wasn't letting them go without a fight. It unleashed a barrage of missiles, their fiery trails streaking through the sky. Zane's quick reflexes sent the ship into a barrel roll, narrowly dodging the explosive projectiles. John's stomach churned, but he held on, his trust in the twins growing with every daring maneuver. "Get us to that wormhole," Elias shouted, his fingers flying across the controls to boost the ship's shields. Sparks flew as a missile grazed the hull, but the ship held together. Zara raised her hands, and a shimmering barrier appeared behind the ship. The drums that passed through it short-circuited and plummeted to the ground, but the larger warship powered through, undeterred. "It's not enough," John yelled. "They're still gaining on us." Elias smirked and flicked a switch. Not for long. The ship's engines roared louder, and a burst of blue energy shot out from the rear, sending it hurtling forward at incredible speed. The warship lagged behind, its weapons unable to keep up with the sudden acceleration. Ahead, the wormhole loomed, a swirling vortex of light and energy. Zara's holographic map confirmed its location, and the ship adjusted its trajectory automatically. But just as they approached, a deep, menacing voice echoed through the ship's speakers. "Return the heirs, or face obliteration." The voice sent chills down John's spine. The warship had caught up, its massive cannons charging with a fiery red glow. Elias cursed under his breath, slamming his fists on the console. "They're going to fire." Zara and Zane exchanged a glance, their markings glowing brighter than ever. Zara raised her hands, and a powerful wave of energy erupted from the ship, disrupting the warship's systems. Its cannons flickered and dimmed, buying them precious seconds. "Zane, now!" John shouted. Zane pressed his hand firmly against the console, and the ship plunged into the wormhole just as the warship regained its firepower. The vortex swallowed them whole, and the warship's blast dissipated into empty space. Inside the wormhole, the ship stabilized, its systems humming softly. The crew let out a collective sigh of relief, but the tension in the air was still palpable. "Where does this take us?" John asked, his voice hoarse. Zora pointed to the holographic map, which displayed a distant star system marked in gold. It was their homeworld, the place where it all began. Elias leaned back in his seat, wiping sweat from his brow. "Well, farmer, looks like we're not just running anymore. We're heading straight into the heart of the galaxy's biggest mess." John glanced at the twins, their glowing eyes filled with determination. Whatever lay ahead, he knew one thing for sure: this wasn't just about survival anymore. It was about reclaiming what had been taken from them. And the galaxy wasn't ready for what was coming next. Betrayal among the stars. The ship emerged from the wormhole into a region of space unlike anything John had ever imagined. Nebulas swirled in vibrant colors, and stars glittered like jewels in the vast expanse. But the beauty of the scene was short-lived as alarms blared throughout the ship. "We got company," Elias growled, slamming his fist onto a control panel. The holographic display showed a massive vessel emerging from behind a nearby asteroid. It was a sleek, black warship with an intimidating silhouette, but unlike the relentless hunters they had just escaped, this ship bore the insignia of an old, noble family. "It's a royal fleet," Elias muttered, his brow furrowed. "But whose side are they on?" The ship's comm system crackled to life. A deep, commanding voice filled the cockpit. "This is General Kell of the Royal Vanguard. Surrender the heirs, and no harm will come to you." John tensed, his grip tightening on the armrest. "Surrender them? Yeah, that sounds like a trap." Zane and Zara exchanged worried glances, their markings dimming slightly as if sensing the tension. Elias hesitated, his fingers hovering over the controls. "Hold on," he said. "Kale isn't just anyone. He served the twins' family before the coup. If anyone could help us, it's him." John wasn't convinced. "And if he's working for the people who want them dead?" "We don't have a choice," Elias said grimly. "If he wanted us destroyed, we wouldn't even be having this conversation." Reluctantly, John nodded. The twins, too, seemed uncertain, but Zane stepped forward, his glowing markings pulsing softly, signaling his agreement. The ship slowed and docked with the massive vessel. As the hatch opened, a tall, imposing figure stepped inside. General Kale was a grizzled warrior with deep scars across his face and armor that gleamed under the ship's lights. He knelt before the twins, bowing his head in a show of respect. "Your Highnesses," he said solemnly, his voice steady. "It is an honor to be in your presence again." Zara hesitated, her glowing markings flickering, but Zane stepped forward and placed a small hand on Cal's shoulder. The general looked up, his expression softening. "I swore an oath to your family," Cal continued, "to protect you, no matter the cost. That oath still stands." John crossed his arms, eyeing Cal suspiciously. "If you're so loyal, where were you when their family needed you?" Cal's jaw tightened, and his gaze darkened. "I was betrayed, just as they were. The coup was swift, and I barely escaped with my life. But now that I found them, we can strike back and reclaim the throne." Elias, ever the skeptic, chimed in. "And how exactly do you plan to do that? We're up against an entire fleet, and the twins are just kids." Cale straightened, his voice firm. "They may be young, but they are the rightful heirs. Their bloodline is the key to activating the royal relics hidden across the galaxy. With those relics, we can rally the remaining loyalists and overthrow the usurper." The twins seemed to understand Cal's words. Zara's markings glowed brighter, and she reached for Zane's hand, their connection deepening. John sighed, running a hand through his hair. "Fine, but if this goes south, I'm blaming you," he said, pointing at Elias. As Cal led them to his ship's command deck, Zara suddenly paused, her eyes narrowing. She touched her forehead, and a faint hologram appeared in the air. It was a memory of Cal, standing in a dark room, speaking to a shadowy figure. "Bring them to me," the figure hissed. "The heirs must not live to reclaim the throne." John froze, his blood running cold. "What the hell is that?" Elias frowned. "A memory. But whose?" Zara's markings flared as the hologram flickered, showing Cal shaking hands with the shadowy figure. Betrayal. Cal turned, his expression unreadable. "You don't understand." "No," John snapped, stepping in front of the twins. "We understand just fine. You're working with them." Cal raised his hands, his voice calm but firm. "I had to make them believe I was on their side. If I hadn't, I never would have found the two of you." Elias snorted. "Convenient story, pal. But I'm not buying it." Before anyone could react, the ship's alarms blared again. A smaller vessel detached from Cal's fleet and began firing on the command deck, sending shockwaves through the ship. Cal's crew scrambled, shouting orders. "What's happening?" John yelled. Cal growled, his composure cracking. "The usurper knows you're here. They've sent assassins to finish the job." John grabbed the twins and pulled them behind cover. Elias worked frantically at a nearby console, overriding the ship's security systems to launch a counterattack. "You brought us right into a trap," John shouted at Cal. Cal, now wielding a plasma blade, growled back. "I didn't know they'd find us so quickly." Zara and Zane stepped forward, their markings glowing brighter than ever. The ship's systems seemed to respond to their presence, and the lights dimmed as a strange energy pulsed through the air. "What are they doing?" Elias asked, his voice laced with awe. Zara raised her hand, and a massive energy wave erupted from the ship, disabling the attacking vessel in an instant. The assassin's ship drifted lifelessly in space, its engines silent. The crew stared in stunned silence as the twins turned to Cal, their eyes glowing with a mix of anger and resolve. Zara pointed at him, and a single image appeared in the air, a shattered throne, and a galaxy on the brink of war. "You can't run from the truth," John said, stepping forward. "Are you with them, or with us?" Cal lowered his blade, his expression grim. "I made mistakes," he admitted, "but I am with you. The throne belongs to them, and I'll die to see it restored." John exchanged a glance with Elias. The twins seemed to believe Cal, their glowing markings dimming slightly as they relaxed. But the seeds of doubt had been planted, and John couldn't shake the feeling that the worst was yet to come. "We're heading to the homeworld," Elias said, breaking the silence. "If Cal wants to prove himself, he can do it there. No more secrets." Cal nodded, his voice steady. "Agreed. But be warned, the usurper will do everything in their power to stop us." As the ship set its course, the twins stood at the viewport, their eyes fixed on the distant stars. The galaxy was counting on them, and there was no turning back now. The return to the throne. The ship entered orbit around the twins' homeworld, a once thriving planet now shrouded in darkness. Its golden cities lay in ruins, their crystal towers broken and blackened. Fires burned faintly across the surface, like embers of a civilization that refused to die. John stared out the viewport, his heart sinking. He couldn't imagine the heartbreak the twins must feel seeing their home in such a state. Zane and Zara stood silently, their glowing eyes fixed on the planet below. Their markings pulsed faintly, reflecting their inner turmoil. John placed a reassuring hand on Zora's shoulder. "Hey," he said softly, "we'll fix this, one step at a time." Elias, busy at the controls, let out a low whistle. "This place is crawling with enemy ships. We can't just waltz down there without getting blown to pieces." Cal, standing at the helm, looked grim. "The usurper has fortified the palace, and lock down the planet. But there's hope. There's a resistance. What's left of it, anyway? They've been waiting for a sign, and the twins' return could be exactly what they need. Elias raised an eyebrow. And how do you plan on contacting them? Send a message saying, "Hey, we've got your long-lost royals. Don't shoot us." Kale smirked. Something like that. Zane stepped forward, his hand glowing faintly as he touched the console. The ship responded instantly, projecting a hologram of the planet. Zora pointed to a hidden valley far from the main cities. It shimmered on the map, revealing an underground network of tunnels and bunkers. "The Resistance," Kale said, nodding. "Smart move. They've been hiding right under the usurper's nose." John crossed his arms. "So what's the plan? We sneak in, say hello, and hope they don't mistake us for spies." Cal's smirk faded. "We'll have to prove the twins' identity. Their markings should be enough, but the Resistance leaders are cautious. If they've survived this long, it's because they don't trust easily." The ship descended stealthily through the planet's atmosphere, weaving between patrol ships and automated turrets. Zara and Zane's glowing markings dimmed as they concentrated, masking their presence. The tension in the cockpit was palpable as the ship slipped past enemy sensors and landed in the valley's shadow. "We're in," Elias muttered, letting out a breath. Now comes the hard part. The hidden resistance. The group ventured into the valley, the air heavy with the scent of scorched earth. John carried Zara, who seemed drained from maintaining their cover, while Zane walked beside him, his small frame tense but determined. Kale led the way, his hand resting on the hilt of his plasma blade. After what felt like hours, they reached a concealed entrance, a narrow crevice in the rocky terrain. Kale pressed a hidden panel, and the rock face slid open, revealing a dimly lit tunnel. A dozen armed figures emerged from the shadows, their weapons trained on the group. "Who are you?" barked a tall woman with sharp features and piercing eyes. Her armor bore the insignia of the old royal family, but it was battered and faded. Kale stepped forward, his voice steady. "General Kale, former commander of the Royal Guard. I've brought the heirs." The woman's eyes narrowed. "Prove it." Zane stepped forward, his hands glowing faintly. The light from his markings spread across the room, forming a shimmering crest of the royal family in the air. Gasps echoed among the resistance fighters, and the woman dropped to one knee. "It's true," she whispered. "The heirs have returned." The fighters lowered their weapons, and the group was led deeper into the tunnels. The underground base was a hive of activity, filled with makeshift command centers, supply rooms, and soldiers preparing for war. The resistance leader, who introduced herself as Commander Lyra, escorted them to a central chamber where holographic maps of the palace were displayed. "The palace is heavily guarded," Lyra explained, pointing to key locations on the map. "Automated defenses, patrols, and worst of all, the usurper's personal enforcer, a cybernetic monster known as Revenant." Elias let out a low whistle. "Great. So we're sneaking past killer robots to overthrow a dictator. No pressure." Zara and Zane stepped forward, their markings glowing brighter as they studied the map. Zane touched a section of the palace, and a hidden passageway lit up. Lyra's eyes widened. "That tunnel hasn't been used in decades," she said. "How do they know about it?" "They're not just royalty," John said, his voice filled with admiration. "They're connected to this place in ways we don't understand." Kale nodded. "The tunnel leads directly to the throne room. If we can get the twins there, they can activate the relic, the heart of Lemora. It's the only thing powerful enough to disable the usurper's defenses." John frowned. "And if they can't?" Cal's expression darkened. "Then we'll all die trying." The battle begins. Under the cover of night, the resistance launched their assault. Explosions lit up the surface as soldiers engaged enemy patrols, drawing attention away from the palace. Meanwhile, John, Elias, Kale, and the twins slipped into the hidden tunnel, their footsteps echoing softly in the ancient passageway. The air grew colder as they neared the throne room. Zara clung to John's hand, her markings glowing brighter with every step. Zane led the way, his small figure unshaken despite the danger ahead. As they emerged into the grand hall, they were met with the sight of the usurper's forces, rows of heavily armed guards and towering machines of war. At the center of it all stood Revenant, a hulking figure of metal and flesh, its red eyes glowing with malice. "Well, this is cozy," Ilias muttered, raising his weapon. "What now?" Zara stepped forward, her hands glowing with an intensity that lit up the entire room. Zane joined her, their markings intertwining as a wave of energy pulsed outward. The guards hesitated, their weapons faltering as the twins' power disrupted their systems. Revenant, however, remained unaffected. It stepped forward, its heavy footsteps echoing ominously. "You will not reach the heart," it growled in a voice like grinding metal. Kale drew his plasma blade, his eyes blazing with determination. "Over my dead body." As Cal charged Revenant, John and Elias shielded the twins, who began channeling their energy into the heart of Lemora. The ancient relic, hidden beneath the throne, began to glow, its light spreading across the room. But the usurper wasn't finished yet. A deafening roar echoed through the hall as reinforcements poured in. John gritted his teeth, gripping his shotgun tightly. "Whatever you're doing," he shouted at the twins, "do it faster." Zara and Zane's markings reached a blinding intensity, and the heart of Lemora erupted in a beam of pure light. The energy swept through the palace, disabling the usurper's forces and sending Revenant crashing to the ground. As the light faded, the twins stood tall, their glowing eyes fixed on the throne. The battle wasn't over, but the tides had turned. The rifle heirs had returned, and the fight for the galaxy's future had truly begun. The rise of royalty. The grand throne room was bathed in the shimmering light of the heart of Lemora, its energy still rippling through the palace. Zara and Zane stood at its center, their glowing markings pulsating with renewed strength. The battle outside raged on, but within these walls, the air was thick with anticipation. The usurper, a cloaked and shadowy figure with piercing violet eyes, emerged from behind the throne, his expression twisted with disdain. "So," the usurper sneered, his voice echoing like a cold wind, "the lost heirs return. I should have snuffed you out when I had the chance." Kale, battered but still standing, stepped forward, his plasma blade humming to life. "You'll answer for what you've done, Erethin. The throne doesn't belong to you." Erethin laughed, a deep, hollow sound that sent shivers down John's spine. "The throne belongs to the strong. And these children," he gestured mockingly toward Zara and Zane, "are nothing but relics of a broken past." John stepped protectively in front of the twins, gripping his shotgun. "They're more than that, pal. And if you want them, you'll have to go through me." Erethin's violet eyes narrowed. "So be it." With a wave of his hand, Erethin summoned a swirling mass of shadowy energy. It coalesced into monstrous forms, dark constructs of alien beasts, their glowing eyes fixated on the group. The room erupted into chaos as the constructs lunged forward. The final battle. Kale charged into the fray, his plasma blade slicing through the dark beasts with precision. Elias, ever resourceful, fired energy bursts from a modified rifle, his aim deadly accurate. John, though outmatched in weaponry, stood his ground, blasting the creatures with his shotgun and shielding the twins. Zara and Zane, however, were focused on something far greater. The heart of Lemora pulsed faintly behind them, as if waiting for their command. Zane raised his hand, and a beam of light shot from the heart, piercing one of the shadow beasts and reducing it to ash. Zara followed, her markings glowing brighter as she directed another beam toward the advancing creatures. But Erethin wasn't done. "You think you've won just because you have the heart," he snarled. "Its power is nothing without a true ruler to wield it." He raised both arms, and the ground beneath them began to shake. Cracks formed in the floor, and a dark, menacing energy began to seep into the room. The twins faltered, their glow dimming as the oppressive force grew stronger. John rushed to their side. "You're stronger than him," he said firmly, his voice cutting through the chaos. "You've already proven that. You're not just fighting for the throne. You're fighting for your people." Zora looked at John, her eyes filled with fear, but his words gave her strength. She reached for Zane's hand, and together their markings blazed like twin suns. The heart of Lumora responded, its light intensifying until it filled the entire room. The turning point. The shadow constructs disintegrated under the heart's radiant energy, leaving only Erethin standing. The usurper stumbled, his control over the dark energy weakening. He glared at the twins, his arrogance replaced by desperation. "This isn't possible," he roared. "You're just children." Zane stepped forward, his small figure radiating authority. "We are the rightful heirs," he said, his voice steady and resolute. "And we will not let you destroy our home." Zora joined him, her glowing eyes locked on Erethin. "Your reign ends here." The heart of Lumora unleashed a final wave of energy, engulfing Erethin in its blinding light. He screamed, his form dissolving into nothingness. When the light faded, the throne room was silent. The usurper was gone, reclaiming the throne. As the heart's energy settled, Zara and Zane approached the throne. The markings on their skin glowed softly, their light no longer chaotic, but calm and steady. They placed their hands on the throne, and a golden beam shot upward, illuminating the palace and spreading across the planet. Outside, the resistance fighters stopped mid-battle, their enemies' weapons deactivating as the heart's energy reached them. The tide had turned, and the usurper's forces began to retreat. Elias slumped against a wall, letting out a relieved laugh. "Well, I'll be damned. They actually did it." Kale dropped to one knee before the twins, his voice filled with reverence. "Your Highnesses, the throne is yours." John watched from the side, his chest swelling with pride. He stepped forward and ruffled Zane's hair, earning a small glowing smile from the boy. "Told you you could do it." A new dawn. Days later, the palace was alive with activity. The resistance had moved in, and efforts to rebuild the planet had already begun. Zara and Zane, now dressed in regal attire, stood before a gathered crowd of loyalists. Their small frames seemed larger, their presence commanding. John, standing off to the side with Elias, watched as the twins addressed their people. "Think they'll be okay?" he asked. Elias grinned. "With what they've been through, they'll be more than okay." Kale approached, his expression softer than usual. "They've asked for you both to stay. They want Earth represented in the new Royal Alliance." John scratched the back of his head. "I'm just a farmer. I don't think I'm cut out for royal politics." Kale smirked. "They seem to think otherwise." As the twins finished their speech, they turned to John and Elias, their glowing eyes filled with gratitude. Zara ran to John, wrapping her arms around him. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice soft but sincere. John knelt down, placing a hand on her shoulder. "You don't need to thank me. You're family now." Epilogue. A galaxy united. Under Zora and Zane's leadership, the planet began to heal. The heart of Lumora, now fully under their control, became a beacon of hope, uniting fractured star systems under a banner of peace. John, though reluctant at first, became a trusted advisor, his simple earth-born wisdom earning him respect among alien diplomats. Elias, ever the tinkerer, took on the role of royal engineer, upgrading the planet's defenses and teaching the resistance how to integrate Earth's ingenuity with their advanced technology. As for Cal, he remained by the twins' side, his loyalty unshaken, vowing to protect them with his life. And so, the galaxy witnessed the rise of two young rulers who, against all odds, reclaimed their throne and lit the path to a brighter future.